In the 1960s, of course, there's a lot going on politically throughout the West. Also, of course, around the world. But in America, you have, for example, Karl Hess. He was a former Goldwater speechwriter who found in anarchism what he really wanted all along. So he becomes an anarchist. You have the Situationist International that becomes a major philosophical influence on anarchism. And they were also a major influence on the student and worker revolts in France of May of 1968. You also see environmentalism coming into the fold here. Murray Bookchin was a guy who kind of brought this into the anarchist movement a lot. This led to green anarchy, and this is expressed a lot by John Zerzan and Derek Jensen. And this also leads to this idea of primitivism, that civilization or industrial civilization itself is oppressive. So that can kind of get taken to a ridiculous level. You also have post-civilization anarchism, that we're going to move past industrial civilization that comes out of this. Of course, in the 1970s, we have the idea of agorism comes up. Basically, you're going to create a free market anarchist society by engaging in counter-economics, activity that's counter the dominant economy. And this was expressed in the 1979 novel Alongside Night by J. Neil Schulman, and then in 1980 in the New Libertarian Manifesto. So anarchism kind of starts resurging during the 1980s. Punk rock kind of popularized at least the label, if not the full ideology behind it. In 1980s, you have Food Not Bombs developing, where people basically share food that was going to be discarded. It's still around today. And anarchists were involved in movements against state communism in Eastern Europe. Following the end of state communism, they began organizing more openly, and you see a lot of anarchist groups throughout Eastern Europe. In the 90s, you get the internet becoming more popular, and this idea of crypto-anarchy, where you're going to use encryption to create zones where the state cannot crack down on, comes out of this, and then hacktivism and transhumanism comes later, where anarchists, there's anarcho-transhumanism. Basically, you're transcending the limitations of biology as well as politics. So that's a very forward-looking idea. In 1995, the InfoShop website was established, which is became a major kind of web rallying point for social anarchism. In the late 90s, I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself in what I'm writing into history here, but in the late 90s, you have the Zapatista uprising against for greater autonomy in Mexico. And this kind of ties into the opposition to the neoliberal policies, where you have the state enforcing certain restrictions and calling it free trade. So this starts the idea of convention hopping after the World Trade Organization meets in Seattle, where anarchists will go from convention to convention and express opposition through a lot of ideas. So social anarchism is really on the rise, as well as market anarchism. I think the internet had a lot to do with this. Kevin Carson has started critiquing some earlier free market libertarian ideas, and I think he makes a lot of major contributions. So he writes at Center for a Stateless Society now, which is a market anarchist media center, which was recently founded, and we'll see what effect that has. There have been attempts to integrate social and market anarchism, Alliance of the Libertarian Left being one of them, which it allows you to take from a broad tradition and have a broad view of free society, and it also leads to you being called a dirty capitalist by some and a dirty commie by others who probably smells bad. So there you go. So of course, anarchism, major force today. Don't really have a lot of time to talk about, say, events of 2008, the major uprising in Greece, the Green Scare, the Republican National Convention, the Twitter felonies that came after that. But anarchism is on the rise. It's on everybody's minds. It's in the media, and it's kind of becoming the new radicalism. Authoritarian communism, I think, is not totally in the dustbin of history yet, but it's getting there. And anarchism provides an alternative to the domination by any kind of authoritarian and the promise for a free world. So that's that. Any questions in the next few minutes? Okay. Nick?
I just had a comment. The only two thinkers I could think of would be Franz Oppenheimer, Albert J. Nock, and H.L. Mencken. That's all I really could think of.
They weren't anarchists, but they were certainly influential, especially in the more...
Franz Oppenheimer was an anarchist.
He was an anarchist, okay. Alright, so, but Nock and Mencken were not, but they were also very influential. So yeah, Franz Oppenheimer. I mean, if you want to name drop, I think Dyer Lum's a great guy to look up. Malatesta, Rudolf Rocker. So, other questions? I think you're first.
So it seems like a lot of modern anarchist thinkers came from Europe and America. Why do you think that is? Why?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it happens to do with the way history developed, and a lot of it comes out of the classical liberal tradition, especially Proudhon. I think a lot of it is, my own Western bias. Things that happen in the West are more visible to me. So there were certainly anarchist thinkers throughout Asia, it's just, I think, limited by the way we're looking. And I think a lot of times in the Western world, you can be more open about being an anarchist. You're not going to get executed as easily. So I think that kind of skews our perception. You in the gray shirt had a question.
Yeah, and actually this kind of addresses what she just asked, but a lot of people's question is, why is anarchism so recent? And I think one of the reasons is that it is actually the modern centralized state that's actually, anomalous in history, as opposed to stateless societies. Not necessarily voluntarist in the sense that we would think of them, but, it is actually a fairly recent thing that there are these large, centralized, ruled from the top states. Even like the Roman Empire, there is no actual criminal law in the Roman Empire. There's only civil law. Everything else is done through the paterfamilias. And, this goes on, basically every single government that has existed before, say, like 1700, is very decentralized, very much not top down.
Okay.
So I think that's the reason that anarchism is only a recent thing.
Yeah, I think that could be, you could say, especially for the formal idea of anarchism, as opposed to like a tendency of people organizing, just somewhere off where the state can't reach them. Of course, anarchism isn't just opposed to the modern state, but you can argue that the modern state is a lot more totalitarian than, say, the feudalism. Political scientists consider the modern state to have arisen after the Peace of Westphalia in Europe in the 1640s. So I think that could be a major development on the actual ism. There wasn't a real political science that was as prevalent, perhaps, until then. Okay.
Do you recommend any titles on histories of actual existing anarchist groups like the Pirate Utopias or
Utopias.
Maybe some of the groups in Spain in the 30s. I've heard that these groups exist, but I don't know if
okay.
titles are...
Titles a little difficult for me right now, but a lot of this can be found by Googling. There's a lot of anarchist presses out there. Kate Sharpley Library, AK Press. I think we have some Black Cat Press titles back there. They would be good places to go for that. A great history of the whole Spanish Civil War is Anthony Beevor's The Battle for Spain. That doesn't really focus on the anarchism, but it gives you a sense of the context. For other societies out there, Paul Avrich is a good author to look up. He was a historian of anarchism. So I don't know if that helps you out.
Orwell did something on Spain too.
Oh yeah, well Orwell, his history of Spain, the Spanish Revolution, wasn't focused on anarchism. It was his personal experience. But
right.
Orwell's Homage to Catalonia is a fantastic read. It's very short, gives you a view of what's going on in Spain. I think there's another question. Jack, are we done?
Yeah.
Or Doug, do we have time for one more? All right, one more. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just wondering what you thought of, like, I just noticed, like, for example, African anarchism, there's a lot of historic Africa before colonialism. There were a good deal of tribes that didn't really have a king or a leader, but there were small tribes, and I was just wondering, like, I mean, I support the market anarchist position, but I also noticed, like, what you were saying with anarchists in the past, have this, like, aversion to wealth or having a lot of wealth, and I noticed that, like, those African countries don't have that wealth, and that's how some of them thrive, and then you have the rise of the modern state just with all the wealth, and then they can suck up the productive capacity. So wondering what your comments or thoughts.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of tribes in history have been more egalitarian than others, where you don't have this huge top-down thing going on. And David Graeber talks about this in Fragments of an Anarchist Anthropology, which we might have a free copy in that Lees or X paper box back there. Yeah, that's something that should be looked at. I think maybe they just weren't able to figure out a way to have money without having domination. Whereas, say, with mutualism and agorism, these are attempts to have a functioning market society where you don't have people dominating over another. So I think that's one way you could think about it. All right, so thanks. Going into the other presentation here.